A chronology of Master Foxe, his martyrology. An advertisement to the reader, that here is preferred unto him a compendious chronological table of the most remarkable things contained in the whole book of Martyrs, according as they are set down after Master Foxe, his method and computation, digesting them into several columns, the first and smaller column making report of time. 4 next larger persons, 6 and largest of matters, concisely anatomizing the whole body of the story into the master veins, arteries, and sinews. 7th, last and least, pointing to the place in the large volumes where the contents of all the other volumes are to be found, and filled up with flesh, blood, and spirits of larger discourses. To which we have added this brief chronological digest, that it may serve the studious reader either as a perspective whereby to view what ground he is to travel, and where the several turnings are before he begins to read, or as a register or notebook whereby to recollect his thoughts and observations after so long a travel in reading so voluminous a work, and at times to be both as a map of the limits, a skeleton of the limbs, and portraiture of the face of so rare a story and a ripe martyr, as also a methodical index to find and fetch in the main bulk of any special piece of the story, out of the heap of the prolix circumstances wherein it is covered, when it is to be remembered or punched, in all which thus projected, and with extraordinary pains and care effected, if any reader from his knowledge of other histories conceive that many touches of additions or alterations of things, names, or times would have done well, let him remember that Master Foxe, his Book of Martyrs, was the copy set before the pen to write after, both for matter and method, as also that the scope of the penman was to make this model a key to the same, for that if we had any way set this and the great volume at difference and odds, we had set the Son against the Father, many references of this to that would have misreported things, and the whole project had been ruined. This child then, although a tender little weak one, comes abroad under the parent's wing, and is modestly bold to speak and go on this way, because in its words it doth, as we speak, say after the Father, and follows the Father's footsteps through, though it cannot stride so wide. The hope is that the nail will not score this paper with dislike, whose fingers never felt the pains of carrying the pen through so troublesome a business, and that the exercised hand in penning things of this nature will be merciful in censuring this chronographizing of Master Foxe his story, whose parts, though belonging to the same time, are oft so far dispersed, and the same things at sundry times so frequently repeated, that it could not be but a great labor to gather them into time's method. Farewell. Okay, Anno Christi, year of Christ. Let's see. Emperor of Rome, Greek, France, Germany, and I guess Rome. Bishops and popes of Rome, kings of England, archbishops of Canterbury, the author premiseth. A preface declaring the difference of Rome from Rome, that church being now revolted from what she was in first life and conversation in. 4 evils. Prophanenes, as simony, murders, poisonings of each other. 2, omission of ministerial duties as a preaching. 3, schisms and fractions to the number of 18 since Pope Damascene. 4, covetous injustices to get money by 15 unlawful practices. 4. 1. Annats and vacancies of archbishops, bishoprics, abbacies, and spiritual places. Retaining of other livings besides that the incumbent now pays for. 3. New annats upon change of the incumbents. 4. Preventions of benefices before the fall. 5. Resignations upon favor. 6. Commendums. 7. Compositions with them that are non-resident attending at court. 8. Dispensations for any condition or sin. 9. Exemptions and privileges and the continuations of them. 10. Mandates to the ordinaries. 11. Penitentiaries and absolutions from the Pope. 11. Pardons and indulgences. 13. Making notaries and proto-notaries. 14. Bulls and commissions for new foundations. 15. Giving the pall to archbishops newly elected. Let's see. Secondly, jurisdiction and power in 5. 1. Elections of bishops and such offices, for whereas in the apostles' days, the apostles with prayer and imposition of hands elected bishops and ministers, as James was made bishop of Jerusalem by the apostles, as may be seen in the 5th page of this volume. After, in the increase of the church, the elections of bishops and ministers stood by the clergies and the people, with the consent of the chief magistrate of the place, and thus it continued till Constantine, the 4th emperor, and after. But when Alexander the 2nd came, he was chosen without the emperor. And after him Hildebrand and his followers ordered the matter, that first the emperor, secondly the lay people, lastly the clergy, for the most part, were excluded. These are particulars. 2. Judiciary power. For whereas in the primitive times the bishops debated all causes of faith only by scriptures, and other questions of ecclesiastical discipline by the canons of ancient councils, now scriptures and councils are set aside, and all things are determined by the Pope's new decretals in his canon law. 3. Inculcation of all ecclesiastical promotions, for whereas anciently, according to sacred councils, the holy fathers and the common law, bishops, doctors, patrons, and so on, might bestow the benefices, and so on, in their own precinct, now the Romish Church encroaches upon and getteth all into her own hands and power. 4. Binding and loosing, in which what the scriptures give generally to all the church, Rome arrogates to herself, and she only will alone have the keys, whereas again the scriptures give authority to no church in some things. There Rome will enlarge herself, and fit the wards of her keys, so as she will unlock and lock those things which never came into God's mind to allow, as to loose and discharge subjects from their oath of allegiance to their prince, and any man from perjury for money, and to bind with excommunication persons for petty matters, as breaking parks, not ringing bells, and so on. 5. Secular. Oh, I see. This is the Empire of Rome, maybe? Okay. See, this is where... Secular power over emperors, kings, and civil magistracy whatsoever, to excommunicate, depose, and so on, and put in others, make all subject to him. Whereas it was not so from the beginning, no, not of later times, but Gregorius Magnus was subject to Mauritius and to Foxe, though a wicked emperor. Okay. 3. The titles and style of the bishops of Rome. Anciently, the word pope was common to all bishops, as it is common in signification coming of, what is that, papus? That is, father. St. Austin, being called Pope of the Council of Africa, Jerome so called of Boniface, and Cyprian of others. And the highest bishops anciently were not called more than patriarchs, as were 4 so called, or archbishops, and metropolitans. But now the Pope will have the name Pope peculiar to himself, with addition of the high titles of Vicar General, Vicar of Christ, Universal Bishop, Head of the Universal Church, Prince of Priests, Bishop the world, a neither God nor man, but a thing between both, against which arrogancy is showed. 1. The ancient title of the Bishop of Rome. 2. The act of the Nicene Council against carrying causes to Rome and their 5 reasons. 3. The act of the Synod of Meleviton against appeals to Rome, the exposition of the name head bishop. 5. How the name universal bishop did rise and stand at Constantinople. 6. The name bishop of bishops forbidden by Cyprian. 7. Gregory, his refusal of the name universal bishop. 8. Objections for the name universal bishop answered. 9. Arguments proving the equality of the apostles. 10. Answer to arguments for Peter's supremacy over the apostles. 11. Certain demands which answered overthrow Peter's supremacy. 12. 13 causes of the Roman bishops coming to this height. So these are volume 1 and the page numbers that they show up on. 4. Doctrine. For Paul the Apostle and Peter's successor flatly differ in 19 summary points, v. touching justification, merit, strength of nature, and man's will, distinguishing of law and gospel, distinguishing of righteousness of God and of us, traditions, subtle speculations, man's being in the first and second Adam, imputation of the first and second Adam's condition to man, the glory of a man's condition in Christ, difference of days, difference of meats, limitation of marriage, sacrifice for sin, the Holy Communion, the number of the sacraments, what language to be used in the church, obedience to kings, the armor of the church, in all whichsoever knows St. Paul's judgment, let him suppose the clean contrary opinion, and that is the tenet of the Church of Rome. The several differences may be couched into this one. Paul advanceth Christ, and casteth down man. The Church of Rome casteth down Christ, and advanceth man. Okay, year of Christ. Secondly, the author of this history comes to the body of the story. Secondly, the author of this history comes to the body of the story, that Christ is rejected and crucified by the Jews, choosing Caesar for their king in the 17th year of that Tiberius. God's judgment on the Jews for it. Tiberius Caesar, hearing of Christ's miracles, resurrection, and ascension, moves the Senate to receive and adore Christ as God. The Senate of Rome refuseth to receive Christ for God, because contrary to the law of the Romans, as they said, he was received for God before the Romans decreed the same. This Tiberius lived 6 years after Christ's passion. God's judgment on the city of Rome for refusal of Christ, their emperors turning extreme tyrants against them, almost to their utter subversion. And for 300 years after Christ, in which time were 32 emperors, was there scarce one emperor but came to an ill end. Tiberius and his tyranny described, by whom he was executed. God's judgment on Pilate that condemned Christ, which Pilate was deposed from his place, banished, and at length he slew himself. The stoning of Stephen, the proto-martyr, at which Paul was persecuting agent. This day, saith Dorotheus, suffered also Nicanor, one of the 7 deacons, with 2,000 Christians more. Paul is converted. Tiberius Caesar, having reigned 23 years, dies, after whom succeedeth Caesar Caligula. C. Caesar Caligula. All right, year of Christ 43. Emperor of Rome Claudius Nero. King of England Arviragus. All right, C.C. Caligula, commanding his image to be set up in the temple of Jerusalem, which was the beginning of the abomination of desolation, to stand in the holy place. He took the Romans' wives violently from them, and having deflowered 3 of his own sisters, banished them. By this, see Caesar Caligula. Herod that mocked Christ and murdered John the Baptist was banished and dies miserably. Caiaphas also was deposed by the said Caligula. Caligula also was deposed by, Caiaphas also was deposed by the said Caligula. Caligula, being slain, leaves in his study 2 bills or notes of them whom he did mean to persecute and kill, which notes he called the sword and dagger, which were used for cruelty by him that followed. V. All right, the Emperor of Rome, Claudius Nero, King of England, Arviragus. All right, Claudius Nero, who reigned 13 years, a grievous tyrant. James the Apostle, the son of Zebedee, martyred. Simon and Parmenas, 2 of the 7 deacons, martyred. Thomas the Apostle, preaching to the Medes, Persians, and Parthians, Germans, and so on, was slain with a dart. Simon Zealot's preaching in Africa and Britain was crucified. Andrew the Apostle preaching at Patras in Achaia was by Aegeus the governor crucified. Matthew the Apostle wrote his gospel to the Jews in the Hebrew tongue. He is martyred with a spear. Matthias the Apostle preaching to the Jews was stoned. Philip the Apostle, having much labored among the barbarous nations in preaching, was crucified and stoned to death at Hierapolis. James, the younger son of Alphaeus, the brother of the Lord, bishop of Jerusalem, was thrown down from the battlements of a church and afterward stoned and so martyred to death. All right, Emperor of Rome, Domitius Nero, in 67 year of Christ. Also in England, in the 67th year of Christ, Claudius the emperor sails into Britain and subdued part of it to the empire. We'll start here. James the younger, the son of Alphaeus, the brother of the Lord, bishop of Jerusalem, was let me back up. I don't remember. All right, James the younger, the son of Alphaeus, the brother of the Lord, bishop of Jerusalem, was thrown down from the battlements of a church and afterward stoned and so martyred to death. With James, many more were stoned, as may be collected out of Joseph 1.6.20 and so on. Mark the evangelist martyred at Alexandria, as Reusner affirmeth. The description in general of the 10 persecutions in the primitive church under the Roman emperors, wherein first the wonderful many kinds of torments of the Christians are described by Rabanus. Secondly, the admirable patience of the tormented, declared by St. August. Thirdly, the infinite number of those patient tormented ones set forth by St. Hierome and Heliodorus. Under this emperor, I guess that's Domitius Nero, see, 63 is maybe when Claudius the emperor sails into Britain and subdues part of it. I don't know. 67, Domitius Nero. Under this emperor was the Under this emperor was the first of the 10 persecutions, by which, as Eusebius reports, whose cities were filled with the dead bodies of all ages, sexes, and sorts. This Nero was so wicked that St. Jerome upon Daniel saith, or St. Hierome upon Daniel saith, he was thought to be Antichrist. For so prodigious a monster was he, more like a beast, or rather a devil than a man, that he caused his mother, his brother-in-law, his sister, his wife, great with child, and his instructors, Seneca and Lucan, with divers more of his own kin, to be put to death. He fired Rome in 12 places, and sung the while the verses of Homer. 69 to 73. His end, after he had reigned 14 years, was by the Senate proclaimed an enemy of all mankind, condemning him to be drawn through the city and to be whipped to death, for fear whereof he fled and slew himself. Under him suffered Peter and Paul for Christ about the later end of his reign. Page 40. A question moved where St. Peter were ever at Rome. 73. Another question concerning Paul, whether he wrote the epistle to the Hebrews and that to Laodicea. Let's see, in England, Martyrs. 73 AD. Paul declares the sum of that doctrine which he preached. By 81 AD, Anacletus, Emperor of Rome. Vespasian was the quiet prince, put the distinction between the first and second persecution. Vespasian was the quiet prince that put the distinction between the first and second persecution, and that he did not proclaim persecution against the Christians. Howbeit he with Titus destroyed the Jews for their rebelling, killing many above 11,000, selling into slavery 17,000, and leading 2,000 in triumph to be torn with wild beasts and cruelly to be slain. Page 40, chapter 2, line 70, and page 41, chapter 1, line 1, and so on. Okay, 91, Bishop of Rome, Anacletus, alias Cletus Clemens. In England, Marius. In 96, year of Christ. For Rome, Domitianus. Oh, maybe that's Clemens in 96 AD. So 81, Anacletus. 91, alias Cletus. And then in 96, Clemens. Domitian, brother of Titus, begins his reign mildly, turned a blasphemous idolater against God, commanding men to worship him, and a cruel tyrant against Christians, for by him was moved the second persecution. Simon, bishop of Jerusalem, was crucified. John the Evangelist is banished into Patmos, but after the death of Domitian, he was released under Pertinax the emperor, living to the time of Trajanus, governing the churches of Asia and penning his gospel. He converted a thief and flies out of a bath because wicked Cerinthus was there. St. John could not, as the Papists say, be the Virgin Mary's confessor, seeing according to them she was without sin. Domitianus, fearing the coming of Christ, commanded all that could be found of the stock of David in Jewry to be slain. Another cause inciting persecution was false accusation of the Christians. But however, the Inquisition was this: swearing the truth, whether thou art indeed a Christian. If they confess this, the law condemned them for that alone. Okay, a chronology continued. We're at 100, the year of Christ, 100 AD. I do believe I'll stop here and we'll pick up the timeline in the next video. Thank you.